I'm going to talk about commerce and the Internet of Things. My background, as was kind of described, is very mixed. I studied product design, so I'm not a technologist particularly, but I ended up surrounded by a lot of technologists. So my first business was called Tinker London. The archive is still there. And we were the first distributor of the Arduino platform. Who has heard of the Arduino platform? Raise your hands. Ooh, 2, 3, excellent. Okay, I'll go into details about what that is. And I run a consultancy. I run the Internet of Things meetup in London. You guys seem to have a meetup going here, but it hasn't had an event in about 3 months. So I'm personally encouraging you to start one after this talk or to revive the one that already exists, because I think that Finland has a lot to offer to this field. This is my 5th trip here, and I have lots of friends who used to work at Nokia who are now doing different things. I have lots of friends who are in the design scene, and you kind of have all the elements you need in order for Finland to also carry its own when it comes to this topic. Some of the nice clients I've had in the past few years. And essentially, I'll talk about 3 things. I'll talk about making and what I mean by making. People talk about developing, designing, building. The world in which I'm kind of working in is a world where making is sort of a big expression. I'll talk about the importance of hardware when we talk about the Internet of Things. We often talk about big data, and Doug's talk this morning is perfect because you've heard a little bit about it and about what the Internet of Things might be. I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into that and hopefully not be too technical, and if you have questions, we might have some time. And again, what you can do about it. So this is the Arduino. This is a credit card-sized electronics platform, learning platform. So if you want to learn about how to make a prototype or a very small product, or maybe you have you want an LED to blink every time something happens in your data center, if something goes wrong and you want something at home that sits there and just tells you, you can build it yourself, you can make it yourself. The Arduino has been distributed out of Italy for the past 7 or so years. It launched in 2007, and initially it was kind of for artists and designers who wanted to learn how to do interactive projects, but were constantly sort of burning through every platform that was out there. They either didn't really know enough coding to do anything useful, or the platforms are super expensive. This is 15 euros. This is nothing. This is like an evening out. And people make things with it. So you can Google just about anything that you can think of. Someone will have tried to connect the Arduino to it. And I really mean anything. Since 2007, that platform has sort of become a baseline for other people to build other educational platforms. So a lot of what you might find on Kickstarter, for example, will describe itself as Arduino compatible, because it became a benchmark for people trying to do things and learning how to make things. The Raspberry Pi, who has heard of the Raspberry Pi? Okay, a little bit more people. So the Raspberry Pi came along afterwards. And just to give you, in terms of scale of who was buying this and why they're buying it, they sold 1 million units within a week. And they couldn't have done what they've done without the Arduino coming in prior to that and sort of setting the scene. And you can find books about how to use the Arduino. There's a few friends of mine have written the Arduino for Dummies books. It's very, very open, very accessible, very cheap, and extremely easy to use. So people have used it all across the board. You'll find that most major corporations in technology have somewhere in their R&D departments, there'll be a box with some Arduinos, and they will have been trying to make something, make a product experiment, looking at the future of their business in terms of smart products, new product offerings, and I really mean, large companies. So some of my clients in the past have included EDF and British Gas, so large energy companies, large telecommunications companies. So O2 created so part of Telefonica in the UK, they created an add-on to the Arduino, for example, and worked with the Arduino group. Intel now have a board that is Arduino compatible. So this world of making and creating in a very cheap, and cheaper than what was available before, lightweight open source way has really taken on and created the product ideas that we now see on Kickstarter and in other places. So that whole sort of the Internet of Things really crystallized when these platforms became available. So this is a map I've been sort of working on. It's, you know, if you're again sat at the back, you won't necessarily see it, but the creation of those platforms around 2006, 2007 meant that we went from a few commercially available products to quite a number of commercially available products and or experiments. Because when it's on Kickstarter, it doesn't mean it's on the market yet. It just means that the idea is out there, and maybe they're trying to get funding to then maybe productize it and develop it. They're not quite there yet. But it doesn't really matter because the idea is out there, and suddenly people start to sort of gel around ideas. So if you've been listening to the talk again this morning by Doug, he talked about wearables. The first successful wearable was on Kickstarter. It was Pebble. It was a e-ink watch. Who's here heard of Pebble? Hopefully some people. Okay, so if you Google Pebble now on Google search and Google Images, there is literally a split between Pebble, the wearable watch, and Pebble, a pebble, like a rock. And so it's such an important idea that it's really gained a lot of traction. And they were the first ones to make a decision about wearable watches. So it's kind of the Dick Tracy watch coming alive, really. And after that, immediately after they were successful on Kickstarter, large corporations started to make their own wearables. So now every single large company that we know has either had a wearable watch out, LG, Samsung, etc., or is coming out with one. So on September 9th, Apple may or may not reveal a new watch. And that wouldn't have been, again, possible without this sort of confluence of a number of different elements. And the Internet of Things initially didn't really mean any of what we see now. It didn't mean wearables. It didn't mean anything in particular. It was coined by a researcher at AutoCAD kind of research lab at MIT who was thinking about RFID technologies at the time. He thought, well, isn't it great? We have RFID technologies. We're able to do asset tracking and manage assets and know when things are coming in and out. And, you know, we now sort of use that same term to mean anything, a product, any commercial product, industrial product, building, environment that happens to then connect to the internet using a number of different communication strategies, whether that's Wi-Fi, GSM, etc. It's almost become just a bucket of approaches. And it also means that whenever anybody says, oh, the Internet of Things will fail, it's like, well, what do you actually mean? What kind of product do you mean? What kind of application of these technologies do you mean? In a way, the Internet of Things is not a field. It's not even a market. It's an ensemble of technologies that, when applied in the right way, can be useful or completely useless. So what are people making, and what are people making with those technologies? They're kind of making all manners of things. And again, if you Google, I'm a big fan of Twitter, so I usually keep track of the hashtag IoT for Internet of Things, and that's the best way to know what's going on. And you'll see all manners of things. You'll see smart locks, smart clothing, smart thermostats. It'll kind of be everywhere. But at the heart of most of these interactions, most people only very recently have been building everything as a dependent to the mobile phone. So when initially, so prior to 2007, prior to the Arduino, prior to the iPhone coming out, people used to have product ideas that were completely independent from smartphones, because smartphones weren't really a thing. You were lucky if you had a cell phone at all. So something like the Hug shirt was best invention of 2006. It's two shirts, one which you hug, and then the other one receives your hug through vibrations in the fabric. So remote closeness, remote, whatever you want to call it. And they never managed to commercialize that idea because, of course, trying to make washable, wearable products is very difficult. But it was out there as an idea. Who has heard of the little rabbit or seen that little rabbit anywhere? 1, 2, 3-ish. Okay, so that's called an Nabas tag. It's now been rebranded as carrots with a K and a Z, which is the worst sign of marketing ever. And it is a rabbit that comes as 2 rabbits, and it came with a broadband connection in France, where the founders were based. And you sent a rabbit to someone else's home, and when you moved the ears of one rabbit, the other rabbit's ears would move as well. And the market for whom this was really relevant at the time, it turns out, was families with divorced parents. So the child would have one rabbit, and then the father, usually in another home, would have the other rabbit. So they could maintain a nonverbal communication channel that didn't involve mom. And that was kind of more neutral, which is sad. And also, you know, it's still a market. It's still an opportunity. So they sold about 250,000 units over the course of 5-7 years. They've now sort of sold on the company to the manufacturers, who then sold it on to a robotics company, a Swedish robotics company. So they still sell it, you can still buy it. And then there was an American company called Ambient Devices, and Ambient Devices is better known for the ambient orb, which used to be this glowing orb you would put on your living room or in your living room somewhere, and it would give you colors depending on how your stock was doing. So, you know, green for great, red for sell. And they also created something called the ambient umbrella. And the ambient umbrella was an umbrella that glowed whenever it was going to rain outside. No screen, it had a little GPS unit that talked to a server somewhere that checked the weather locally. Very, very simple interaction, but you kind of knew what was, you know, implied. It didn't change anything particularly to the functionality of the device, which is great, and it just was useful. It was quite fun. So none of these things were mobile dependent, really. The one in the middle is called the Goodnight Lamp, which is my startup, which has taken me 10 years to commercialize, and it's 2 lamps. You give the little one to a family member somewhere else in the world, and when you turn your lamp on, the little one turns on. So if the family member is in a different time zone, it's a good way to let them know, now's a good time to call, I'm available right now, I'm around. So very, very simple nonverbal communication again. Now, again, maybe more intensively in the past 2 years, as we've seen crowdfunding help boost some of these ideas forward, the mobile is at the center of everything, even when it doesn't make any sense, which is the really fun thing, because that's when you see product experiments which 4 years ago would never have seen traction, would never have seen investment, now are getting traction, investment, market, appeal, and PR because of the platforms that are now available. So the one on the left is called Smart Stones, and they still haven't figured out quite yet what the product design is about, but they obviously have really figured out what the app looks like. And you can just tell by the visual. It's like, what is this thing they're holding? I don't quite understand. But, you know, there's an app, and that's the most important piece. Never mind that, you know, the object itself might, I think, it's something you hold, and depending on how you hold it, it tells someone else how you're doing. So if you have an elderly parent living on their own, it's meant to somehow communicate to you that they're not feeling very well. Very unclear. But they were on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart just last week. So obviously they have the connections to get them in front of people, even when they almost don't even have a market. They almost don't even have a product, really. They're still experimenting. But they have an audience. Suddenly they have a lot of eyeballs. Whether it turns into sales, you know, question mark. The second one is a marketing experiment. So Nivea in Brazil made little sort of samples in newspapers, so in kind of women's magazine. And a part of the kind of sample you could tear off, and it had a little low energy Bluetooth unit, and you could kind of strap that onto your kid. And so when you were at the beach, you could tell how far away the kid was from you and when they were too far. And you sort of think about that and you're like, Okay, so I can't tell that by looking at my child. I have to have a mobile phone that tells me how far away they are. Like, there's something weird about that interaction because you're also at the beach. So hypothetically, your phone is somewhere where there isn't any sand, and you can't even see the screen half the time anyway, and you're with your family. Surely you're enjoying yourself away from technology. So this is this is obviously kind of a marketing shtick. It's not a product they intend to commercialize, but they made an experiment, and they have the budget to make these kinds of experiments. But again, the mobile phone is there, and you kind of wonder, why is the mobile phone there at all? Just because it's easy to develop an app doesn't mean it justifies having an experience. And and in a way, the mobile phone is kind of an interruption to the experience. And that just talks generally about the rise of wearables. This is an interesting chart that basically shows you that there's almost very little that people agree on about where they would prefer wearing a smart thing. So 20% of people would prefer having it clipped somewhere, i.e. removable, and then 28% of people fine would do with a wrist thing, again removable, but then you sort of end up with a group of people who are like, well, I don't know about any of the other options really, which means we're sort of trying to sell people something they don't necessarily fundamentally want, potentially. And in a way, what they're doing, quite cleverly, I think, and I think this speaks to our last speaker, really, which is getting us used to being traced and tracked, and our behaviors becoming a nice dashboard somewhere that we can sort of have a look at if we're trying to do self-improvement. Doug this morning talked about quantified life. It's more often referred to as quantified self, and QS on Twitter if you're interested in that sort of thing. And it's all about self-improvement, and there's something very North American about that idea to begin with. Very sort of, yay, go-getter, let's go to the gym and exercise until we drop dead. And I want to see every single calorie as I lose it. And I want to see every single gram as I lose it, and my pulse and number of steps. And there's a lot of American attitude in that, which is where it's had the most traction, of course. But now we're starting to kind of move into traceability beyond things that we necessarily understand, with objects that we don't necessarily see as technological. So these two examples are examples of products that aren't quite out there. So Ringly's on pre-order. Covert is still, I think they're still developing it. And these are two rings that, so Ringly has a little LED on the side of it, and depending on the emails you receive, it shines a different color. I can't think of anything more intrusive than that. Because if my phone is in my bag, there's probably a reason why it's in my bag. Otherwise, I would be holding my phone, because that's what I do every single minute of the day. And suddenly there's this LED that would blink. So let's say you're in the middle of a meeting, and there's an LED blinking with a light. What does it mean? Which one does it mean again? Did red mean my boss, or red means my ex, or green means my boyfriend, or green means work? There's suddenly a sort of a whole interaction that you haven't necessarily invited into your life, and a whole other set of things to worry about. And I think we have a lot to worry about already. So Covert are doing the same thing, except it vibrates, which might be less creepy, might be less intrusive, but I really want to see that if you've got your hand on the table and then it goes bzzz, because everybody will just kind of reach for their phone, assuming it's their phone vibrating, and then you go, oh no, sorry, it's my ring. And again, that's kind of a weird interaction, I think. The weirdest one, and I really, if you want some entertainment this afternoon, go to this company and check out their video, and check out the YouTube comments on this video, because it is internet gold. Sproutling is a tracker for your child and a toddler, so very, very small babies. And the company advocates that really what you want to be doing is you want to be staring at a phone to tell you how your child is doing. And so you can't hear your kid, obviously, and you can't see your kid, so you're going to check your phone. And the phone will tell you if the baby is cranky. And the phone will also tell you how long the baby has left in their nap. And I'm not sure how they're predicting that. I'm not even sure what kind of interaction they're kind of building in. But the video itself is really interesting. There's a lot of the kind of rhetoric around this particular product is very much about you regaining control of your life, which is, you know, of course, why we have children, is to regain control of our lives. So again, kind of the use of technology and the use of mobile phones in the middle of an experience that probably doesn't need one. And so we kind of went from something that was notionally creepy, so these are ankle units, GPS units for obviously people who have been in prison or coming out of prison or have a sort of territory that's imposed by the law, to something that's, you know, fun, because it's the same technology. It's almost the same interaction. In the case of Sproutling, it's on the ankle of the kid, but there's a mobile phone and everybody's smiling and it's in pink, you know, it's gonna be great. And so we're kind of being, you know, very quietly taught that this is all totally okay and this is totally fine. And essentially getting used to the idea that eventually insurance companies will have access to this. And this is not even me being slightly dystopian, because one of my clients at the minute is organizing an event for the insurance industry around the Internet of Things. And so they're looking at these technologies and going, you know, wouldn't it be great if I could change insurance premiums depending on what someone actually does at the time they do it? So imagine you have car insurance and you get into your car and you might have drank too many beers. Your insurance policy might be canceled the second that you turn your car on, because they know, because there's a sensor in your car that looks at your sweat, because you can tell what the alcohol level of someone is by their sweat. So just on the wheel, you could probably track how drunk someone is, and then you can just invalidate policies on the go. Or sell people things on the go. Oh, we see that you're entering a new country. Would you like travel insurance? Because we know, because you're wearing that wristband that tells us how much exercise you're doing. And none of this, again, is particularly futuristic. There's already insurance companies that are tracking how often we go to the gym and sort of, you know, supporting us in that. So the more you go to the gym, the more they can see that you sign up and you actually attend, then the lower your premiums. Which has meant that in the city, in London, where my boyfriend works, there are people who will just go to the gym to see the check-in at the gym and then put something in their lockers and then go right back out. Because the insurance company doesn't know how long they've stayed there and whether they have actually used any equipment. But we're only a few years away from them actually being able to tell that actually they did this much exercise and they lost these many calories, because you're wearing the bloody wristwatch anyway, or the wristband. So, and this is dystopian, so you can check your phones for a second if you're not into dystopia. If you kind of push this thought a little bit further forward, then you imagine a place where, in order to pay as little premium as possible, you're encouraged to give them as much information as possible. And so, by default, let's say you have you have cancer, and your insurance premiums are really high because you either have a history of cancer in your family or they know you're actively undergoing treatment, then you're going to be expected to wear all these devices in order to track, for example, how often your medication changes. My father has prostate cancer. He can't travel abroad because no insurance company will cover him unless he has a stable medication treatment for 6 months at a time, which he hasn't had in the last 5 years. So them knowing as much as possible hypothetically supports you because it gives you the insurance premiums you have, but it ends up also saying something in a broad sense to society, which is, oh, you're wearing one of these things. That must mean that you must need to be tracked in order to get lower premiums, so something must be wrong with you. And so you have a sort of bell curve where half the population, the middle of the population, wears these devices because they don't want to pay that much insurance. And then rich people can kind of pay the maximum because they don't want to be traced, and very poor people can't afford it anyway. So there's a kind of weird, possible, again, dystopian, and you'll excuse me for doing dystopian at 11:45 in the morning. There's a kind of, strange world we might be living in. So here are some of the thoughts and some of the things that I think are happening. I think ideas are sort of taking on and having a life of their own very, very quickly. We don't really need science fiction anymore, I think, because we essentially end up with enough science fiction in crowdfunding sites and startup culture. There's kind of a lot of science fiction thinking there. There's a lot of really weird products being pushed out, and you sort of look at what they do and you go, my God, you guys are smoking crack. And that's the new science fiction. These are products that before these things were available, you would have really struggled to find any support for, any funding for, any advertising for, because someone would have gone, I don't think this is valuable. Whereas now you can broadcast to the world, which might be a community of people who think the same as you or sort of encourage you, and they can encourage you in a very simple way. You can pledge £5 to someone and make their business completely take over. But ideas are also kind of dying very, very quickly, which means that I have some of the startups around me in London who, if they're not successful on a crowdfunding campaign, which is essentially 30 days of trying kind of hard, because let's be frank, it's just checking emails a lot and tweeting a lot about what you're doing. There's not, a huge amount of effort involved in that, who, if their campaign fails, are really like, oh, that's it. I'm not going to do this anymore. And they've sort of canned it on the basis of 30 days. I don't think that anybody who's ever gotten involved in the manufacturing industry has, thought that they could ever achieve anything in 30 days. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, maybe. But that kind of long view and that ability to invest in a project in, really and financially so, I think we're kind of losing. So we're expecting quick results and also quick returns, which the investors are sort of pushing us to do anyway, because if you can't sell your startup to Mattel or Disney within 2 years, then they don't really want to hear from you anyway. So we're encouraging short-termism, and I think that's at the cost of good ideas and good products that could be going out there. And we also have to be really wary about what we're developing and why, especially in the wearables market. Most wearables will be kind of used for about 6 months. That's the recent data. And then people will drop them. Because it's something you wear, and it's something you wear that might be sort of connected to an activity that is short-termist. So I want to lose 5 pounds. Oh, great, I've lost the 5 pounds. Can put that in a drawer, give it to my kid, put it on eBay. There's a lot of wearable technology now that's available on eBay, and no one is buying it. People who are buying the latest and greatest sort of smartwatches from whoever and then cannot find anyone to buy it off them. So there's a short-termist thinking there, but it's actually quite dangerous because these are products that involve a lot of electronics, a lot of components, a lot of heavy metals, and we're developing them and just kind of putting it out there, expecting it to, bomb within 6 months. Is that really what we're expected to do as startups, as small companies in the 21st century? I can completely get that from large companies that have established themselves and a chain of manufacturing supply chains for the past 15, 20 years. Yes, of course, they can act at that scale. But for us small companies, it's a little bit irresponsible. So this was yesterday, for example, someone selling their Google Glass on Twitter. Because why not? Of course. And the reaction wasn't, oh yes, oh my God, I really love one. The reaction was, why, you didn't like it? And then her response was, well, it doesn't really do it for me. It's like you spent $1,500 on something that really didn't do it for you. Like, that's a really weird purchase, and also, if she purchased it at all, really. So, meaning and making, it's not meaning, it's making. Making can't mean wasting in a way. We can't be trying to promote experimentation, trying to promote acting quickly, being lean, being really, agile in a way that is destructive to everything around us. And I know I sound like a bit of a hippie, and I know that I benefited from selling Arduinos, but there are platforms you can do other things with. Whereas a finalized product, a commercially, certified product, that's it. And in the design world, in product design world, there's something called design for disassembly, which is you have to admit that at some point the product that you design will end up in Southeast Asia somewhere being picked on by small kids because they want to get the metals out. And if you don't have that kind of thinking from the word go, then you're making it really just a difficult process. And you're making it unsustainable for everybody. So design for disassembly means, okay, well, admitting that the product that you want won't be used for more than 6 months, then what? Accept returns, do some kind of exchange, work with charity around you to enable those tracking devices to be used by other people. I was trying to get rid of some phones, of some kind of old phones that I had, and I found a charity in London that reprograms the phones to be the equivalent of 911 calls, because women in violent households need a phone that just does that. So they take the phones, they just accept them by the mail and reprogram them and give them to those women. I'm sure there are similar applications for wearable products. And sometimes the answer when you're designing something isn't really hardware. When people talk about the Internet of Things in a home context, the first product that always comes out is the smart fridge. And I really wish we would just drop this entirely, because every single year since 2001, large companies have been coming out to CES and CeBIT and other large fairs with a smart fridge that obviously no one is buying. And maybe what you want really is just a smart list. Could be an app that gives you a list of the things that you've bought because you've bought them because you were at the supermarket and they probably have data they could share with you. And then you have a countdown. So stuff that's really fresh, you probably should dispose of after a couple of days. And stuff that's, spices, you don't really care, but you have a list. And maybe that's as smart as we want to be when it comes to our fridge, really. And the answer to, is there any milk left, is always no. And you should just always buy milk. And there's another kind of Silicon Valley obsession with the Internet of Things, which is often that even very, very early stage startups will always price them at below $200. There's this obsession with, oh, well, we have to be competitive with the rest of the market. That's impossible. You're a 3-person band in a basement somewhere. You can't be competitive with the rest of the market. You're just going to be either eating up any profit you could be making or not selling at all. So why don't you do something of value, present it as something of value, and get people to pay for it? Because it turns out that a lot of people are willing to pay thousands of dollars for good beds and lighting and things that exist in the home that have high value. And maybe that's what we should be building. This is a random thing because I think maybe there's someone in the room who can help with this, and I really hope. But there's also really interesting ideas about the way in which we present smartness to people. In the product design industry, you have standards around how you communicate the recyclability of something. So every single object you have that's made out of plastic, there's a little sign that says, this is recyclable. But the thing in the middle, the number in the middle, is the type of plastic. So that someone further down the line knows which bucket to put this in. And now they do it through infrared sort of beams, and they kind of push things out of the belts really, really quickly. But there's a standard there that everybody kind of agreed on. And maybe there should be a standard for connected products. This is a connected product, and this is a tiny URL where your data is stored. And everybody should do this. Because in a way, it kind of gets me to see, oh, cool, okay, well, this is kind of cool, but this is creepy. Can I delete this? Can I archive this? Or can I share this with someone else because I'm trying to prove that I've been good and I've gone to the gym? And there's no standard for that right now. You buy something, you get given something. At best, you will have dropped the packaging, at the first sort of instance. You'll never keep the manual, but you kind of know that something's happening, and if it's given secondhand, to your kid, they don't really know what's happening. And so there's data that's just kind of sat there doing nothing, potentially. So if you're vaguely interested in this, hopefully this is interesting to you, there's also something about knowledge and something about knowing what are the elements of how we create the Internet of Things. And a good friend of mine, Tina, who created the eat.fi website, which is, I think, quite a famous website on restaurant sharing in Finland, she's just created this called No Cards, which is a set of cards with components on them and very simple explanations as to what those components do. So when you're trying to experiment around thinking about new ideas and creating new products, instead of buying a bunch of things you're probably never going to do anything with, just look at some cards and some information and have some basic information about what's out there and play around with those ideas. And she's based here and she's great, so you should talk to her anyway. So why damned if you do, damned if you don't? Well, it's, when presented with innovation and presented with new, hypey things, when you're in technology, there's sort of a reflex to get involved no matter what. And I think that we have to just be a little bit careful and also a little bit smart about what you do. So inform yourself, talk to some designers, talk to some products people. You have a very rich history in design in this country. You also have a very rich history in technology in this country and continue to do so through this conference, which is full of people talking about data centers and paper mills, which is crazy. And so their components are there, but often the communities don't talk to each other, which is why I mentioned the Internet of Things meetup in Helsinki. There seems to be one, but whoever is running it has stopped running it in June. And I really would encourage someone here to pick that up. I run the Internet of Things meetup in London. We have over 3,000 members, and we've been meeting monthly for 3 years now. So I really, would hope that someone here would think, okay, well, let's just see who's out there. Let's see what ideas are out there and what people are thinking about this topic. Because it doesn't have to be wearables. It could be smart homes, smart security, who knows, smart cities, etc. But unless there's a community there, then the discourse kind of goes away with when people like me take a plane back to London. And I would hope to see things grow locally. Otherwise, we're kind of back to a world of Casio watches, which are things that I bought when I was 7 years old because I think my brother had one and I thought that was cool. But, I would never buy again as an adult, and I really don't want in my life particularly. And that's it. Thank you very much.